The Mindfulness and Grief podcast offers compassionate insights for coping with grief and life after loss. I'm your host, Heather Stang. Welcome to episode 3. Today we will be talking about sibling loss with Renee Nickell, who is the author of the book Always My Hero, which just came out in this July, actually. Welcome, Renee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Renee, I was wondering if we might start by maybe sharing, the background of your experience as a sibling who has experienced a loss.
Well, my brother and I, we were just a little over 2 years apart. We grew up in a divorced family, and we were just very close. I mean, our parents divorced when we were young, so we grew up together, and once we became adults, we actually got married the same year as each other. We did the family vacations together. We did, a few just Christmases, and our kids grew up together. So we were just our families were close, and then he was tragically killed in Afghanistan, and actually right before Christmas, December 14th, 2011.
And so you and your family are a Gold Star family.
Correct.
And your brother is a hero.
Yeah, he is.
And hence the title of the book, Always My Hero. Mm-hmm. And so what has your experience been as the sister of a hero who's died in the line of duty? Is that different? Do you sense, your sense, is that different than maybe other types of loss?
Well, I can't speak for other types of loss. I mean, I've lost, grandparents and friends in high school. But for me, losing my brother was world crushing. And I don't even know how to describe it anything other than, just a complete and utter devastation to not only my life personally, but my immediate family unit, my husband, my children, and and then everybody else. So I mean, I can see it even as far as aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends. I mean, it was very, very devastating, and still is.
Right. And as you mentioned, each loss is unique, right? Grief is incredibly unique and personal. Each person we have a special relationship with. And yet there are also some similar textures, I'll say, to certain types of loss. Like if you lose a child and you talk to other parents who've lost a child, there tend to be some similar themes, although, again, the story is very personal. Yeah. And so for you, as you've moved through your circle of people, and I know you and I have met through TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors that serves families of military loss and veterans. So, is there anything in particular that stood out for you that maybe as a tribe you've kind of noticed any types of themes?
Themes, between siblings, parents, children, I would say that the loss is so incredibly unique to each one. And I think everybody feels like their loss is the most important. So, maybe a spouse feels like their role was the most important loss, and the parents feel like their role was, the most important. And siblings, I call it the forgotten mourners, because, we feel like our role, losing a sibling, is just as important, but we feel unheard. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot of validation for the sibling loss.
All
So
right.
it's
Well,
hard.
and I think I've in talking to clients and, witnessing sibling loss in my family, which some of both of my parents had lost a brother by the time I was 7. And so I grew up in the family dynamic where my parents were bereaved siblings. My grandparents had lost children, and each person in that whole family system had a very different take and role because they had a very different relationship.
Yeah.
But I did witness what you have said, the forgotten mourners, the
Mhm.
feeling unheard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you speak more about that for you?
Um, well, for me personally, after a sibling loss, you're not walking around, calling yourself a forgotten mourner. You're not self-aware that your grief is being put off, because really you're just trying to cope. You're just trying to get through the days. And for me personally, um, I felt guilty for uh, telling my mom, that I was hurting because my brother wasn't here. So it's in the conversations with people where you kind of feel you feel withdrawn because you don't want to mention your pain, because somehow it should be less than the parents. Um, and so it's more of um, it just becomes like a habitual thing that just kind of adds up over time. I don't think I was ever really feeling, I mean, I felt lonely, but I think that was part of me trying to process grief. And I went through the depression. But at the time, I couldn't really see that I wasn't processing what I needed to process. It was more of a stuffing, I guess.
Yeah, none of us really go through those early days, months, weeks, even maybe years of grief
Yeah.
with complete self awareness and clarity, right? It's
Right. Right.
very foggy, very fuzzy.
Yeah.
And it might, I'm wondering for you, was there a point in time where you kind of realized that the experience you were having it when you became aware that you were feeling forgotten? Or that you were
Um,
aware you were kind of regulating what you were saying and doing?
so, so I honestly, I can tell you that in my personal life, there was a lot of difficult family dynamics, and and sometimes I think when we don't want to process what's happening in our own life, we tend to get involved in other areas of people's lives, because it seems more exciting. Maybe you feel like you're being the hero for somebody else, and so your own junk just gets put off, and you're just saying, oh, I'm going to deal with their junk. And so really, I can see it now looking back, that I really had to separate myself from from certain people in my life, because it wasn't healthy for me, and I wasn't dealing with my own grief. And once I separated, and it forced me into, and I'm not saying everybody has to do this. So if you have people around you who are a great support system, and they are loving and they are helping you, and you feel free to grieve in your own way, that is wonderful. Keep that support system around you. For me, I was displacing my grief. And and so once that was out of the way, I was able to really focus, and that was probably a couple years after my brother died. um, and so I actually started writing my book in 2013, and as I was writing it, I realized this is an absolute disaster. I cannot do this right now. I'm in the beginning stages of dealing with my grief, even though I was 2 years out. But, so I put that on the shelf and I just began to work on me. And it was a several year process.
Well, that's going to be a great comfort to people who are listening, who are maybe a couple years out, because there's all this societal pressure to hurry up,
Yeah.
hurry up in your grief. Even to the point where there's a man on the street survey that was done where they just asked people, how long do you think grief lasts? And people were saying things like 2 weeks, 3 days. It was shocking, right? You're just like, well, obviously they've never had a loss.
Yeah.
But even people who have had a loss can become, if you're far enough out from your own pain, it can kind of be like, okay. And even those labels of, oh, she's doing well. Like, what does that even mean in grief?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Be alive. So
Yeah. If she's breathing, eating, and sleeping, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what you mentioned about just the writing, I'm fascinated to hear. You started writing. You felt like it was too much. You backed off, and then did you? How long before you dove back into to rewriting your narrative? Really revisiting your
It
narrative.
was 4 more years.
Wow.
It was 4 years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of intense things that happen in those 4 years. So, some people might be discouraged by hearing that. They might be like, I'm almost 7 years out, and someone who's a year out is probably thinking, wow, 7 years sounds like forever.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, it's like, it's a flash. Like, I feel like it just happened yesterday, but not, like there's a emotional growth that happened in those 7 years. So even though it feels like in my heart that my brother just died, like I can't believe it was 7 years ago. There's been a lot of emotional healing that's happened in those 7 years. And so someone who is only 6 months or a year out, and I talk to these Gold Star siblings, I talk to them online, I talk to them through email. I'm always like, oh my goodness, like they're so fresh in their loss.
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was something I could tell them to encourage them that, I don't know if it necessarily gets better, but you can come to a place where you can be happy. Like I really feel happy in my life, but I also at the same time miss my brother terribly. And you can do the same. You can do both. You can be happy and you can also, miss somebody with your whole heart.
And that's the mindfulness aspect, I think, of this. Mindfulness I like to think of as this big ampersand, a big and sign. It's
Mm-hmm.
not saying you have this or that.
Yeah.
You can have this and that. You can have the pain of the loss and the joy of the memories, or the pain of the loss and the joy of helping other people through the loss.
Right.
And each person has to come to it on their own. And of course, nobody has to come to it, It's, again, very personal.
It is.
But I think you are offering hope. Number one, you're sitting here. You've been able to share your story in a way that is already, it just came out, July 4th, right?
It did, yeah.
And you were on Fox and Friends.
I was.
And you got to share it with the nation.
Yeah.
And it's already having an impact, I'm sure, on Gold Star families and people beyond that circle. And, it might be good for a moment just to explain what a Gold Star family is, because not everyone listening to this is going to be familiar with military loss. Can you just maybe briefly speak to what that is?
So a Gold Star family is a family who has lost a loved one during active duty. And I really feel like while I am a Gold Star sibling, there's a lot of families who have experienced a loss because of active duty service. And so I really want to include them. I really want to include all of those siblings who have had a military related loss. Sometimes, there's suicide after active duty service, or there's injuries that occur, after that happen while on active duty service, but sometimes they don't pass until after, they've gotten out. And there's just so many hurting people that I don't want to be just inclusive of Gold Star. While I'm very honored to be a Gold Star sibling, um, but the term Gold Star sibling is for someone who has lost a brother or sister, son or daughter, spouse in active duty service.
I appreciate your inclusivity, because one thing that we know isn't helpful is when you start to give a hierarchy to grief.
Correct.
Even within the family system, as we were saying
Mhm.
earlier, where this person's, you know, the parent is more
Mhm.
important than the siblings.
Right.
It is different for each one, and so
Yeah.
maybe this would be a good time to circle back to family dynamics. What can you share with us about your observations there?
I think I've talked to enough families through TAPS, different seminars I've been to. I've talked personally to different, siblings, and family. It's just, it's kind of nature of the beast. Family dynamics change, and as much as you don't want it to change, it just does. And um, sometimes what I really think it comes down to is everybody's trying to process their grief in their own way. And definitely in those first couple years, people are not thinking clearly. And everybody is in a self protective mode. It's just self preservation. You're trying to survive. And that's when I think things really begin to fall apart in families, is in those first and second years. Um, I personally have experienced it, um, and I've seen so many other families experience it. And I haven't really, I don't have experience with the reconciliation part. I don't know if that happens. I believe it can happen for families, but my story is not this whimsical, you know, fantasy story with this beautiful happy ending, where everybody just comes together. I mean, that would be wonderful, but it doesn't happen that way for everybody. It didn't happen for me. And so it's trying to find happiness in your life as an individual, and being okay that families do change. Family dynamics do change. And I think that just comes down to people trying to deal with their own grief in their own way.
So, what are some of the things you did for you so that you can now find some happiness and peace and equanimity in your life, while, in the other hand, holding on to that loss?
Yeah.
What did Renee do to
Um,
get from there to where you're sitting right now?
well, I did a lot of therapy. Um, I mean, I did years of therapy in and out of therapist office. I did a lot of talk therapy, and to me, it was not helpful. It may be helpful to some people, but I can tell you that the biggest thing that happened, the biggest impact that happened for me was when we moved to Texas. We found, and I don't even remember how we came across this organization, but I started hearing about equine therapy and working with horses. And so I started looking up equine therapy in Texas and saw that they specialized in combat veterans, PTSD, um, they just traumatic loss. And so I just started making phone calls. I found a equine therapy nonprofit about an hour away from our house. They're called Pause for Reflection. I mentioned them in the book, and they help out veterans. And I just remember just pulling up to this beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, just pastures and all these really beautiful horses. And that was just the most therapeutic thing that I did was the equine therapy and working with these massive horses.
Can you say more about what you did there? Because I know equine therapy exists.
Yeah.
I
And
don't
people
know
probably like, what is that?
What do you do? What do you
Okay,
do? Do you just hang out with horses?
You do. Okay.
Wow.
So my first few sessions were hanging out with horses. You're basically just sharing a fence with a horse, and you're talking with the therapist, and she's prompting you. She's asking you questions, and she's kind of reading the horse as you're talking, and reading his behavior, because a lot of people don't know this, but horses feel human emotion. And so they actually display what you're feeling. So if you can't name what you're feeling, your horse is going to tell you through his behavior.
That is fascinating.
It's incredible. And I was a skeptic until I realized that, yeah, these horses are, I can't put to words what I'm feeling, but I see that this horse is starting to walk away from me. And I'm realizing, okay, I'm starting to feel fearful. You know, he's backing off because I'm feeling afraid. So yeah.
Wow. You know, this reminds me of drama therapy as it applies to grief. I know that there's people out there who will work with a bereaved person, like let's say a mother whose son was shot in gang violence, and they will, in front of her, she sits and witnesses them act out her grief.
Wow.
Or even act out the death, you know, acting out different aspects. So it externalizes the story, and it also helps create a narrative. And you know, Dr. Robert Niemeyer and a lot of other grief therapists have done research around the importance of creating our own new narrative, and in order to do that, we have to know what our narrative is. And so it's as though the horse is externalizing your experience, you know, so you can see it. And I imagine that's an incredibly powerful moment when you, plus the connection you feel, you know, bonding with another person or an animal during tough times helps build so much resilience. So did you get the same horse? I'm curious, did you get the same horse each time, or did you have different horses?
Well, because horses have different personalities, they really, they kind of started out with the easiest horse with me. And, you know, and there's this, and I talk about this in the book, that there's this, you know, really dark, big, massive horse out in the pasture. He's the horse that everybody's afraid of. All the other horses know that they're in his tribe. You know, he's the boss. And, I mean, if you can just picture like the black stallion, and he's just very mysterious and scary looking. And I'll never forget the day my therapist said, okay, we're going to work with Rex today. And I was like, no, we're not. And she was like, yeah, we are. And, you know, and he ended up being my horse. You know, I mean, he is the one who really took me on the healing journey, because just thinking about it, he was that thing that I was most afraid of, and he was that thing I was most afraid of facing. And going through that journey of trying to harness this horse that I was incredibly afraid of, I mean, just crying and having anxiety, and him like running away from, he could just kept running away from me because I was so fearful of him. But me having that task of having to harness him, and every week learning and teaching him to walk beside me as a partner, and not like drag me around, as he was, bossing me around. It was really, it was just such an incredible experience to have that last session of him and I just walking beside each other, me not having to tug and him not pulling, but him just walking beside me because he knows he was my friend and he was my partner. And to hear that therapist tell me, you're where you need to be. And I think we all know that this is your last session. I mean, and that was just incredible.
It's almost like a metaphor for the grief experience, isn't it? Like at first the buck and bronco is pulling you around,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but through some work, through different types of modalities and different types of support, we become where we're walking beside the grief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. And it wasn't, it wasn't just us learning to walk beside each other, but it was me learning to be honest with myself and being able to name why I feel a certain way, what's triggering it, talking those areas out and seeing the reaction from the horse. It's just, it was 9 months. They say that 3 months of horse therapy is equivalent to 3 years of talk therapy. So I did 9 months of horse therapy. So I pretty much got 9 years of talk therapy in 9 months.
And for you, it was more helpful.
It was.
Yeah.
It was incredibly helpful.
And animals, they don't have a need to lie. I mean, sometimes my dog might lie that he was not fed when he was fed, but when it comes to the emotional stuff, they just aren't motivated to lie. They're such great barometers. So I'm glad you shared that modality with us, because there might be some people listening where equine therapy would resonate maybe more so than talk therapy, which isn't a requirement for grief work. Sometimes it's expressive arts, it's getting into your body. It depends. It's different for each person.
Yeah, you just have to find out what it is for you that's going to help you. Sometimes it's just people getting involved in whatever, getting involved in organizations, just volunteering, whatever that is for you that's going to help move you forward. Do it. It doesn't have to be tailored to one thing.
Right. And sometimes it's a little trial and error,
It
where
is.
you might try a couple things that don't work, and then that will, something resonates and lands. And so not to give up, I think, on the first, like you said, you tried talk therapy. It wasn't particularly helpful for you.
Right.
Could be for someone else, but you just tried this thing and it worked. So, that takes a little fearlessness, because I think anyone going into grief work with a professional, whether it's a horse professional or a human professional, it's scary, because you're having to turn towards the pain. And I think that's one of the scariest parts of grief. I mean, it's scary just to feel overwhelmed, but then to say, I am going to look at what this is, there can be a lot of resistance there. But but it's the only way out is through, is to actually look at it. And you're not really even out, when I say out, I think what I mean is out of the overwhelm to where you can have that equanimity with it, because you're never actually out.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like every single week you're like, oh, I can't wait to go. It's forcing yourself to go.
Yeah. Forcing yourself to do the work.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So what are the fruits of that for you? Who is Renee now? How are you similar? How are you different?
This takes me into, siblings feeling like they are living in that shadow of their hero's death. And that does not take away from what our siblings did, their sacrifice, the pain of the loss, who they are as a person. I think it just, siblings just feel like that inability to measure up, or um, I mean, there's such incredible honor that comes that's in a military loss. I mean, to me, it's the highest honor is to sacrifice your life for your men, for your country, for your family. Um, and not that they go into it thinking that, they do it because they love their um, you know, they're Marine. Well, my husband, I mean, my brother was a Marine, so my husband's Air Force. So they do it because, they love what they do. They love their country. And so there is honor that comes with that. And I think siblings can feel, how can I ever live a life worthy that even compares to what my sibling did? How can I ever live up to that in my parents' eyes? How can they ever be proud of me the way they are proud of, my sibling? And so for me, it was, I think, just coming to that realization through my faith. I'm a Christian, and so, not everybody has the same religious beliefs as me, but for me, it was realizing that I have just as much value in, being self-aware of that my life has just as much value. It's just as important. Um, it's doing the grief work. It's realizing that I don't want to feel like this every single day when I wake up. And so there has to be a part of me that looks to something greater, something better. Just, having that hope that things can and will get better.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and I think in that you find yourself, you find out who, I mean, I know there's all this, you know, lingo of finding yourself, but truly you have to, when you lose a sibling, you do have to find yourself. You do have to find out what it is that makes you happy and motivates you in your life.
And so is there one, practice, or whether it's from your religious tradition or anything else, an attitude that you've cultivated that's helped support you through this, in addition to feeling worthy and
Yeah.
feeling like, there's something bigger, which are both very valuable. Um, when we think of the aspects of post-traumatic growth, those two fit
Mhm.
right into there.
Yeah.
But is there any other, again, attitude or practice or something that you can share with the listeners and viewers that might
Well,
offer them a way?
yeah. Well, I'm a mother of 4 children. I have a husband. I'm a military wife. My life is complete chaos. So the only time that I get is, at night after everybody's in bed, and that's when I do my most self-reflecting. Some people like to do it in the morning when they wake up, but I don't like to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I don't want to wake up an hour before everybody else. So I do it at night. I have an app on my phone. I read devotionals that I feel are pertinent to where I'm at in that moment. And so every night I try to read, at least one day's devotions, and I just find something, whatever speaks to me. I don't try to be legalistic about it. I just try to find that one thing that speaks to me. I will note take. So if I just have a thought that pops in my head that needs addressed, I just type it out real quick. I typed out something last night. It wasn't like this long prayer. It was just something I personally was struggling with, and I jotted it down. And I said, I hate feeling this way. And I was very specific as to what I was feeling. And even just getting it out, that helps. You know, um, So
That goes back to being honest with yourself,
it does.
and I love that what you're sharing is that you're taking just, a short time each night. It doesn't have to be a half an hour or an hour or whatever, just a few minutes to connect to something that inspires you and lifts you up, which for you
Yeah.
are the devotionals. That helps bring some peace in what is a very chaotic life, because when you're grieving,
Yeah.
and as early in or as far out, you don't get to put life on pause.
Correct.
You don't get to be like, hey, 3-year-old, sleep for like months. And you wouldn't want that anyway.
Yeah.
But it's like life keeps happening. And so carving out the tiny bits of time,
Mhm.
to feel love, to feel forgiveness, to feel joy,
Yeah.
to be honest with yourself too. I love that you're also weaving in some writing there
Mhm.
too. And I imagine that probably helps you sleep better, I would
Oh, it
think.
does. Just get that out there. Just get it out of your head, before you go to sleep. And, um, it's just, it's been incredibly helpful for me.
I'm so glad. Well, thank you for sharing your time and again your full story. We didn't want to give everything away in the podcast, but to
Yeah.
learn more about Renee's, there's a lot in here about your brother, which I really appreciated reading, and his service to the country, and a lot in about your relationship with him, and your healing journey. And so this book is a fabulous book from a fabulous, caring, loving woman.
Thank
And
you.
I'm wondering if people want to know more about you or contact you, what should we do?
Well, you can go to my website, reneenickell.com. I can spell it for you. It's also on the cover of the book, but it's ReneeNickell. And there's ways to contact me. There's actually a contact link. You can go on there, and it sends an email directly to me. I do always try to answer my emails. You can also reach me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page at RM Nickell. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. There are numerous ways to contact me. Facebook messages, I get inundated with Facebook messages. So sometimes I'm not always so quick to respond on social media, but email is probably the best way to contact me.
Great, thank you. And I will pop up your webpage for those of you who are watching, and those of you who are listening. I will put that information in the show notes if you are listening to this through a podcast service such as iTunes, so that you can have access to that. So, is there any final words you want to say before we say adieu?
Oh gosh, there's hope. There
Oh,
really is. And I know when you're 6 months out or you're a year out, and I've been there. I've struggled with depression and anxiety, and I've had to take antidepressants, and there were moments where I just didn't want to live anymore. There truly was. And that it just makes me so emotional to go back to that time. But there's hope.
mm,
You can get through it. You will get through it. You are strong enough. And I'm here, and there's people who have been there, who are here and want to help.
thank you, Renee.
Thank you so much for having
Namaste.
me.
I appreciate you coming on and being your true, honest, loving self. So
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Mindfulness and Grief Podcast. If you found what you heard useful, please consider rating, reviewing, or subscribing to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more grief support, please visit our website at mindfulnessandgrief.com, where you will find free guided meditations, supportive articles, and online courses and groups. Special thanks to our sound engineer, Todd Campbell, and to the Atomic Mosquitoes for the opening and closing music. I'm Heather Stang, and I hope these teachings will be of great benefit to all who receive them. Until next time, namaste.